as well as wheredidthetowersgo.com. And Dr. Wood, kind of continuing from our conversation before the break, I'd like to ask you this. 9/11 was a day that really the United States kind of stood still for a moment. I still remember where I was at and kind of the shock I experienced then. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how it is that you began your research. Kind of when did it start? What compelled you or drew you to begin asking these questions and investigating? And how has it unfolded over this time?
Well, everyone has how they're introduced to it, and that really, I think, makes a big difference in how everything unfolds. I heard it in the background as something to question, like, it's not like somebody telling a sick joke on the radio, so I went and turned on the TV and saw more action, and I was already doubting, like, are we seeing another War of the Worlds TV, version this time? And so I need more data. If you don't know what happens, look for more evidence. My parents live near the Pentagon, so, okay, I'll call my mom. She should be able to look out and see if there's fighter jets overhead, because if we're being attacked, she'll see fighter jets. So I called her, and she looked out. She wasn't aware anything was happening yet. And she looked out, didn't see fighter jets, so now she was skeptical. That's how she was introduced to it.
I see.
But I went into the faculty conference room, and everyone was glued to the TV set watching the video play over and over again, the towers coming apart. And I looked, wait, this isn't a collapse? And I looked at it more. No, this is crazy. This is not a collapse. This is the building coming apart. And for me, it was like somebody pulling a yarn on a sweater, just unraveling the sweater with the stuff spewing out in all directions.
I see.
Yeah, something goes kaboomity, boomity, boomity, boom if it's going to collapse as a unit. You see chunks, falling. You don't see it looking like a dust fountain.
Okay, yes.
And I looked around the conference room, and, like, this is a joke somebody's playing. I was, right. They looked at me like I was crazy. And quickly you learn to conform. Don't speak out. You don't want to step outside the norm. It was like everyone was so serious and taken into it. Another weird thing, or noteworthy anomaly about my observations of things, if my eyes and ears don't agree, I turn off my ears.
I see.
So I look with my eyes, and so I was immune to what we were being told to see.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And that made a big difference, I think. And I didn't get sucked into that. And I felt like I was in the twilight zone. Why doesn't anybody else see it? I went up to my office and started making calculations for how long it would take if the building did kind of pancake down. And there's just, no way. Well, maybe I have the coefficient of gravity wrong. I was looking for all sorts of excuses so that I would agree with the others. Yes. But I wasn't going to give up my principles. And I actually went through 4 physics books to make sure I remembered the coefficient of gravity correctly.
And I think at this moment you're kind of referring to the speed with which they fell. It's close to or very much approximating free fall speed, versus if the official story were correct, the form of collapse, et cetera, building failure, construction failure, that it could not have come to ground level nearly that rapidly. Is that fair to say?
Well, I refuse to use the word collapse, because collapse implies the stuff came down. What I saw was the destruction of a building. Okay. The unraveling, the coming apart of a building. And actually the building was destroyed faster than the speed it would take the roof to hit the ground by itself, or a bowling ball tossed off the roof to hit the ground. Yes. That's significant, that it's faster. It destroyed faster. So it didn't hit the ground.
Right.
And then I, kind of realized the buildings didn't burn up, nor did they slam down. They turned into dust in midair. But you don't want to be the only person sticking your neck out, and I assume the grown-ups are going to take care of this. The official bureaus that look into this, so I can go back to do my work and teach my classes and do my research.
Okay, yep.
Because it's somebody else's job.
Right.
And we were also told that about the election in 2000, the presidential selection, where we had the Supreme Court choose our president. They said, we'll fix it by next time. Accept this time. We'll have it all fixed by next time. And the 2000 selection came, and the exact same thing happened, except worse. And I went, wait a minute. They're not fixing this. They're not going to fix 9/11. Whose job is it to fix it? It's our job, all of us. And why should I expect somebody else to do it? The argument's the same for everyone. So I decided I was in a position where, this is my area of expertise. I'm going forward with it. And I told my mom, and she said, well, if you start getting into that, you won't have a career. And I said, if I don't, nobody will.
Well, it's very well constructed, and I applaud you greatly for that. As I've mentioned, so many of the listeners to my programs that write in talk about how they've quote given up. They've stopped trying to tell the truth or communicate these things, and unfortunately, the world we live in, there's so many folks ready to throw stones or tomatoes at the person trying to tell the truth, and sometimes they have very direct agendas as to why they're doing it, but even just it seems like the momentum of people's complacency is enough to cause them to throw those tomatoes. So, Dr. Wood, we're very appreciative that you never did stop telling that truth. And when we come back after the commercial break, I think we'll have an opportunity to get into some of the very focused points, the details of how the forensic evidence tells us that what the official story is that's been sold to us just simply cannot be the case. Folks, we'll be right back in just a moment on the National Intel Report. Ladies and gentlemen of the RBN listening audience, welcome back to the National Intel Report. Sitting in for John Stadtmiller today, I am Antonin Feori of the Crimson Pill program here on RBN. We're joined today by Dr. Judy Wood, author of the book Where Did the Towers Go? Evidence of Directed Free Energy Technology on 9/11. And Dr. Wood, I think a lot of folks, in particular, those that have not really questioned the official story of 9/11, they've come up with a term they call people truthers. It seems like they want to assign a label to something and kind of be derogatory about it and make it go away. And it also seems like they very commonly try to lump everyone into a category. If you don't believe with the official version of events, then you must think that it's an inside job, that the government knew about it, that President Bush knew about it directly. And in your book, you make it rather clear that is not your position. I wonder if you'd speak to that effect for a moment.
Yeah, I begin my preface to the book stating, for the record, I do not believe that our government is responsible for executing the events of 9/11. But nor do I believe that our government is not responsible for executing the events of 9/11, because this is not a case of belief. This is a crime that needs to be solved by a forensic study of the evidence. Before you can determine who did it, you must first determine what was done and how it was done. If you're going to charge someone with a crime, you need to know what crime you're charging them with. What did they do?
It's a very good point. And I think the reason I have such appreciation for your work is that you do remain focused on the forensic evidence itself. And point by point, in essence, the official version or story of the events, your work provides forensic evidence-based refutation for many of those points. Maybe we could begin kind of walking through a list of some of those items, Dr. Wood, that for you, when you saw the story or heard the story, they just didn't square. They didn't make sense with you. Talk us through some of those items that to you really drew you into the process of investigating these questions.
Well, as I said earlier, the buildings didn't burn up, nor did they slam down. They turned into dust in midair. Fire cannot turn a 500,000-ton building into powder in 8 to 10 seconds. The ground only shook for 8 seconds for the North Tower, during the North Tower's demise, but it takes 9.5 seconds to throw a bowling ball off the roof and have it hit the pavement below. So the building was destroyed faster than it would take for a bowling ball to fall to the ground.
Yes, and if I may,
the building didn't fall.
Quite right. And in our limitations on the radio program today, what I'd like to point to is for folks on your website, drjudywood.com, and that's DR, not the word doctor spelled out completely, but drjudywood.com. There's one piece that talks through the billiard ball example, and you provide graphs and a tremendous amount of detail for folks that may be sitting listening now. You're not quite sure what this means about the free fall speed, et cetera. That is a tremendously well-composed exposition of this information on the website. But I'm sorry to interrupt there, but I just want to make sure we got that information out.
Also, from the homepage, there's a link that says Cliff Notes, or you can go to drjudywood.com/WTC, and that's sort of a brief overview of a whole lot of different categories of evidence.
Excellent.
Like one-stop shopping. But the buildings didn't slam to the ground. nor burn up, because if they slammed to the ground would shake for, at least 9.5 seconds.
Yes.
You can argue beyond that, but at least 9.5 seconds. Also, the seismic signal doesn't show that a 500,000-ton building slammed to the ground.
Interesting.
And if
go ahead.
If a 500,000-ton building had slammed to the ground, Lower Manhattan would have been flooded, because these towers were built in the Hudson River with a dike going around the foundation, because the foundations are about 70 feet below the water table.
Ah. Now, is this what they refer to as the bathtub?
Exactly.
Okay.
And if you dropped a 500,000-ton building on it, not once, but twice even, you would have broken the bathtub. As it was, during the cleanup, they brought in earth-moving equipment, and the earth-moving equipment began damaging the bathtub. And they had to build special platforms for the earth-moving equipment to keep it away from the bathtub wall. And when they brought down the remains of Building 6, they had to use a cable. They couldn't use a stick of dynamite because it was too near the bathtub wall, and they were afraid of damaging it. And that's only a 6-story building.
Yes. Very interesting. Now, you mentioned also the seismic readings that did not correlate or demonstrate that sort of impact or activity.
I compared it with the Seattle Kingdom, which is a much smaller building, but there's a lot of data available, seismic signals and whatnot, from a lot of different locations. That the towers are each 30 times, that's 3 times 10, 30 times more potential energy to drop to the ground than the Kingdom was. Ah.
And yet, we don't have the readings from New York on that day. Is that right?
Well, the two towers, one made the same, one made less of an impact on the ground than the Seattle Kingdom. And it should have made way more. And if you go to Building 7, some of the seismic stations around Manhattan didn't even record a building slamming to the ground. There's nothing you could pick out of background noise. You could pick up a quarry blast, some distance away, but not the demise of Building 7, which is a 47-story building.
And Building 7, I think some people aren't familiar with that. I know that at different times when I've talked to folks, they're completely surprised. It's as though they'd never heard of that reference at all. But Building 7's important because it was not struck by, ostensibly, struck by any plane or something of that matter. Is that right?
Correct. And neither was Building 3, and neither was Building 4. And neither was Building 5 or Building 6.
Yes.
It wasn't just 3 buildings destroyed that day. It was anything with a WTC prefix.
Yeah. And yet also with so much video evidence available, we can clearly tell that it was not debris being ejected from or falling from the towers themselves that damaged these other buildings significantly enough to cause any of this. Also, there's a lot of video, and we just simply don't see anything that could have caused those buildings to fail. Is that right?
We don't even need to look at what caused them to, like whether or not they're damaged. Because a damaged building, crashes over and falls down randomly onto the weak side. This thing went straight down and didn't even spill completely across the street on the post office side. That's 3 lanes of traffic. The sidewalk by the post office was still clear, and the post office face that is right across the street from Building 7 didn't have pockmarks on it from stuff shooting out. Now, if you get a paper bag, fill it up with air, hold it tight, then, smack it to break it, if you had flour in that bag, it would go shooting out.
Yes.
When you smash something down, if something collapses down, you get stuff shooting out. The adjacent buildings around the World Trade Center complex don't reflect stuff hitting it. The facade, for the most part, is fairly clear, unaffected, except for a few beams here and there that I call them stab wounds, a beam that jabbed into it here and there. But it doesn't look blasted by a shotgun. Okay,
yes, yeah, exactly. And here's also a point where I would let folks in the listening audience know to hear Dr. Wood describe these things by radio is one matter, but on her website and in particular in the book is just a treasure trove, a tremendous archive of the photographic